Hi, everybody, and welcome. I think most people who have been in the waiting room are here. So let's begin. Just remember, as in our previous conversation sessions, we really would like you to engage with Sylvia, but to do so using the chat box. So your mics and your videos will remain off. But please do post questions or comments to Sylvia in the chat box. I'll moderate and I will bring them to Sylvia's attention at what seems a useful moment. So use that opportunity, whatever you want to comment on or question or point to. It helps our conversation actually be more interactive and engaging and interesting for people. So please do that. If I could just have the screen back for a minute. And just to say to you that, in fact, our last session with Sylvia on the 19th of August, where we looked back at where we started from, I think people found it very interesting. And on the strength of that, and our thinking about this session, we in fact decided we probably need 3 sessions to really have a good take on what's going down. So this session today is going to focus on where we've got to and what progress we've actually made to date. And then the last session on 16 September, and so please put that in your diaries. Sylvia's going to have a look at how do we step creatively forward in a rapidly changing world. There is so much change happening on an international level with how learning operates, as well as internally in South Africa in terms of our government regulations, our changing qualification framework, all the things that we're familiar with. And in fact, we'll talk about today. So off that base, how do we move forward? So Sylvia, I think everybody knows who you are. I'm just going to hand over to you. And I'll stop sharing if you can share your screen and take it on.
Thanks, Andy. I think I have it now. I just need to get to presentation view.
Yeah.
And just, there we go. Okay.
There you go.
Have you got it yet? Okay.
Yes, I see it.
Okay, great. So good morning to everybody. A further thought on skills development. So as Andy said, we're picking up from where we left off and going forward to try and see where we are. But before we start, just a quick one. In 1 or 2 words, if you have a look at this photo that I picked up from Twitter, what is your first thought? What springs to mind? What do you see? What do you feel? 1 or 2 words, if you'd put them in the chat, please. Okay. What did I ask for? Why?
So far,
Did you get any response, Andy?
Yeah, they're starting to come in. So I wrote first, and I said, 1 lonely military vessel and a baboon with an exclamation mark. And Ingrid said, irony of the baboon at a naval base. Miranda said, beautiful sea. Michael said, old buildings. Felicity, old buildings, feeling of long ago. Cheryl said, tranquility.
Oh, that's fascinating. Oh, that's excellent responses. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer, but my purpose was to try and demonstrate how differently we see things. And in the right down the peninsula where I am, people would tend, I think, to focus more on the baboon, because that's fairly, if you move around the peninsula, it's a fairly regular sight. Whereas I assumed that up country, unless you're in some sort of nature area, you wouldn't see. And I like that about there was one comment about the old buildings. It's wonderful. Okay, so the whole purpose is a different way to look at where we are. so
Sorry,
that we can move
couple
forward.
more comments, Sylvia,
Yes, yes.
from Wilma Harbour Industry and Valencia encroaching on natural habitat.
Oh, excellent. Oh, excellent. Yes. And that's interesting because that's a wonderful answer because that demonstrates the challenge between what we try to do and what we do and the unintended consequences. Oh, magic. Thank you for those. That's brilliant. So this is my graphic trying to illustrate exactly what we've just discovered. So if you have a look from the bottom, you start from the bottom, you'll see SAQA. Now, you remember last time I said SAQA, their theme song must be I'm Still Standing, because really that's the most significant organization, institution that's still standing. But STFs are extremely important to skills development, and they have been from the start. The employer, they work with the employers. And so the SDFs have a very good view of how the employers view skills development. And on the side, many employers now, I think SDFs will agree, are motivated by broad-based Black economic empowerment. That's their motivation. In the process of implementing, though, you find the learners. Now, there's two types of learners. There's the learners who genuinely committed to their learning and development, and they're looking for a qualification. And then there's the learners who have become the opportunistic ones who've become professional. I'm joining to get a stipend type learners. And obviously, this is
Sylvia,
different. Yes.
can I chip in now? I want to add a third type of learner. You know, the learner who's committed
Yes.
to learning and a qualification. I think there are a lot of people like that. But I think there are equally, probably a larger number of people for whom the qualification is not relevant. You know, they're there for a different purpose, which is around, can I get a job? Can I get a promotion? Can I move a job? Or I've got a work problem that I'm trying to address and I need to learn something.
Yes, that's those two are excellent. Certainly the one about what you want to achieve, I think is an important one and will be quite important in a comment later on, so we can come back to that. The one about problems in the organization, that type of learner would be the more advanced, probably already academically qualified learner, and they realize they need more. And that's still quite a small section of our population. Because remember, we started, if you go back to last time, we started with just under 20% of people who'd never even been to school. We have a lot of people who are now first generation university. And if you think about it, it's very difficult to be the first in anything because in your family environment, you don't have that supporting culture. Anyway, I'll move on so I don't waste too much time there. So now we get down to the training providers who are trying to assist with this implementation. You've got those training providers who still implementing legacy qualifications, and you've got the ones that have QCTO accreditation. QCTO becomes a very important part of this presentation, and you'll see I've put Department of Employment and Labour on the side there. So you can look from your perspective where you fit into this very large picture because it will influence how you see what we're trying to do. So let's just take a moment to reflect on, did we try to resolve the problems? Remember, there were various problems at the beginning. So in order to do that, I thought I'll pick up and do a time frame like we did last time. I left in the 95, 98, 99, because that's our foundation and it's still there. The most important change is this NQF Act, which brought in the QCTO. That's the most important thing. With it, we had to amend the Skills Development Act to provide for the QCTO, which it's done. I find it fascinating that in 2008, we finally repealed the whole of the Manpower Training Act. Manpower Training Act dates back to the old days, to 1981. So you remember I said it's not the pastness of the past, it's where it is in our present. And that is an example of how persistent the past is. We have to work very hard to do something about the past. Okay, so moving forward, then we start to make a lot of change in terms of dealing with the problems. And the one response to those problems. Remember the problems of the early days were the seaters, wasting money, spending money, and so on. When Minister Nzimande took over, he did do a number of very important practical things. He responded to the CETA constitutions, which were all over the place. He publicized a standard constitution. He publicized requirements for the board. So he tried very hard to take a tight hold of the CETAs in terms of their governance and the management of the finances. He also then had this either I'm just dissolving a CETA or incorporating them into another CETA, amalgamating them, and also putting them under administration when needed, and that's still carrying on. So it hasn't been a once-off solution, but certainly he tried. The other thing that was positive, I think, is the white paper, which brought in a post-school education and training framework. So everybody post-school, wherever they fitted, had a place within that scenario. I see that as a very important thing we managed to achieve as well. But then we have to point out, and you'll see some things across the top here. This is where we started, and it was very people-oriented. And you'll see it becomes very paper-oriented, very bureaucratic. We do some things that are nothing short of going round in circles. So one of those going round in circles was the NATED qualifications. We've got them. No, we're going to finish them. Oh, no, sorry, we can't finish them. We're going to extend them. Oh, no, sorry, now we're going to end them. Going round in circles. And quite frankly, I have no idea where we are now. I think they're still there, some of them, and under Department of Higher Education and Training. That was the last time I looked. But another time we went round in circles and totally destroyed the credibility of Department of Employment and the Department of Higher Education and Training is the communique that was put out by Higher Education and Training that required providers to register with the department. They had no idea how many private providers there were. And in 2018, they said, oh, we've got 2,000 people here. That wasn't even part of it. The requirements they had were totally inappropriate to the range of small providers that exist in skills development. And eventually in 2020, they said, okay, we're giving up on that. That was going round in circles, classic. So we've made progress, and we've gone round in circles, and we've achieved certain things. The major thing that the QCTO has done is to pull together what were every CETA had created qualifications. On the next slide, I'll give you an example of this. One of the things they did in trying to create some order was creating the FLC, the fundamentals, the concept that people needed to have that literacy and numeracy base in order to achieve an occupational qualification. Now, that is certainly all well and good, and what would seem to be a very positive move forward to get some structure. However, those FLC qualifications are quite inaccessible to people who are already in the workplace, who are independently employed, or small and medium people who are not participating in skills development. So they're there, theoretically they're there, but in fact they constitute an obstacle to the people trying to get RPL, who have the experience but don't have the literacy and numeracy. So we haven't quite worked out how to get that to the people, how to allow them occupation. The last two areas you'll see there. I've put in skills programs, and certainly that will be an introduction to next presentation in terms of where we are now. But before we move on, I just want to mention the SACWA announcement at the top that came out last night of the new CEO. So wishing her a really challenging job ahead of her, wishing her all the best. But I promised you that I'll give you an example of what I'm saying about qualifications. What the QCTO was faced with was the most enormous chaos in terms of, just look at this one example of a bricklayer, and you will see all the different bricklayer qualifications. Now, why are there two that says bricklayer building? I can't answer for you. Why we have two bricklayer mining? Also can't answer. I don't know why it wasn't challenged at the time. Maybe it was, and maybe there was a viable answer, but I don't know the answer to that. Right at the bottom, you see what the QCTO have achieved is occupational certificate bricklayer. So they've got an occupational qualification 1, and it's quite possible to have elective areas to deal with anything that's quite specific. And the suspicion is that these are representative of big organizations. When we started, and the ETQA within the CETA, SACWA led before the QCTO came on. Each CETA had a standards generating body. And so each CETA was busy generating qualifications, and people who already had something in place were in very quickly to get that registered. So they started off possibly not on the right foot, and now the QCTO is trying to bring it together and create some order and consistency. So where are we now?
Two comments.
Yeah.
One is, just go back to the bricklaying thing, if you wouldn't mind for a moment.
I can do, yeah. I think
my perception is that your comment
is... It won't let me go back. It won't do anything.
It's fine. I'll just talk.
Okay.
My perception is that what you're saying is exactly correct, because I can remember quite clearly that all of the providers where you had a significant program, we were told, and I was a provider at that time, that we could seek to align our qualification with the SACWA requirements. So people did that, you know, and maybe it's a transitional thing in the same way that SACWA have tried to deal with the foundation, because every qualification had fundamental unit standards, and they were pretty much the same thing, maybe phrased slightly differently. So we were busy, we were endlessly reinventing the wheel in different qualifications. So I can see the value of saying, well, let's try and make a little bit more sense, because from a learner point of view, choosing between lots and lots of different bricklaying qualifications is just confusing, doesn't make sense. And really, what are we actually doing? So I get that. The other thing that I wanted to comment, sorry, Sylvia, go.
Yes, I think you're right. It's not that people had bad intentions. They were simply following along with what was the rule at the time.
The other comment I wanted to make was, if I look at your earlier timeline, it seems that when government is doing things at a macro level, if you like, when they, for example, are dealing with CETAs that are messing up, they've been quite effective, but they seem to have little grasp of how business really operates, and the reality that so many businesses, whether it's in the skills development arena or any other arena, are small businesses, tiny businesses, SMMEs, and they are just not, if they can control it from the center, they might not do too bad a job. But as soon as they try and apply that mentality to the world, things don't work well. And is that your perception too?
Absolutely, 100%. And just to point out one thing, I think there has been a move to standardize and create the higher education, the TVET and so on. So the public structures, there's been an enormous amount of good work done in terms of getting that capacitated. Certainly no problem at all. One of the things I picked up in when the SETAs are put under administration, it's usually for financial reasons. And so there's been an influx of accountants. I no disrespect to accountants, but their view is a controlling view, and it's controlling the activities. And I'm sure if Morena's listening, she would agree to this. So you have an example under the CETA, the construction CETA, CETA, where your requirement now in terms of applying for discretionary grants has become incredibly onerous because you have an accountant mentality. We have to shut all this down. We have to close all this down. So we have this enormous bureaucracy developing in order to control. So it's moving further and further away from a small, medium, and micro enterprise. It's literally becoming a metaphor for our inequality. You've got the people succeeding who are succeeding faster and building upon it, and left behind are the small, medium, micro, informal. And we're in Africa, we're not in Europe. And the small, medium, and micro is a major part of the economy in Africa. And we certainly, the concept of fighting against the waves coming in. That's what we're trying to do if we're going to try and bureaucratize an informal economy, and it's an enormous economy.
Is your sense that government is beginning to appreciate that, or do you think we're still going to have this command and control mentality going forward?
I do think there was some kind of a watershed. We had COVID, which caused people to think differently. I think that was quite important. And then we had the election where the ANC realized, oops, they really are paying attention. They really are going to stop voting for us if we don't pay attention. And subsequent to that, you've had the ERRP, the Reconstruction Redevelopment, I think the words are plan. And you've also had the District Development Model, DDM, which is under Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I'm a great admirer of her administrative and control skills. So there's an idea that, no, we have to do something, and there's a number of the presidential employment initiatives and so on. So I do think we currently, and it's just a year or so old, and we don't really know the outcome yet, but we are currently in a change of mood. And I also perceive, I don't know if I'm correct, I also perceive the Department of Higher Education and Training, which had become very public focused, is now starting to respect the fact that we need private providers as well, and they have something to contribute, and we need to work with them. So I do think there is a change, yes. We don't know where it's going yet.
Just a timing warning, you've got 6 minutes.
Okay, cool. Okay, that's great. So my overall point will be, I'm going to summarize very quickly. My overall point is we need to watch what we're measuring. If we're measuring something as a success, will that get us where we want to go? So I did a quick summary. There's various, from the perspective of the individual, you can see there's various points where we have made progress, but certainly RPL is only just starting to get off the ground. The CETA has, control over the CETAs has certainly been an area. Private providers, however, have really been messed around with this registration, then withdrawal. And now for next fortnight, regulated skills programs is going to be an issue. From an employer perspective, the reduction to a 20% levy refund is very anti-participation, and employer participation is very important. 2 points to leave with. The OECD research on critical skills. Employers are saying, I can no longer rely on a qualification as a reliable recruitment tool. I need to train, I need to assess myself, I need to do my own assessment. And also for next week to think about understanding the workplace. DHET does not understand the workplace. Department of Education, Employment and Labour does understand the workplace. And they are currently using UIF funds to retrain people who are on unemployment to put them back into work. And what I will cover in a fortnight is another circle that we've been going through, which, well, pass the parcel is probably more accurate. ASDSA, the whole concept of employment started off in the Skills Development Act under Labour, stayed there for a while, then moved off to Labour. So we need to review employment services. I will do that in a fortnight as well. And the next thing I will do to end off here today, we have certain constitutional rights. Our constitution is superior to all, as far as I'm concerned. And we have a requirement for certain public administrators to comply with. Efficient, economic, and effective use of resources, 1 point. And people's needs must be responded to, and the public must be encouraged to participate in policy making. So all those who are aware of what the QCTO has done can simply dump regulated skills programs on Department of Employment and Labour. That's what we will be covering. And I will also expand upon our rights in terms of administrative justice and access to information. I hope I've made it, Andy. Where are we on time?
We do have time. I think the quick question that's going through my head is, I love what this slide has to say and what the regulations, the promotion of administrative justice, etc. say. Question is, how on earth do we make sure that these people abide by them? Because we keep seeing new bits of regulation put out for comment in December. And similar.
24th of December.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that the only way to make it work is the promotion of access to information, to ask for the information, and then to pursue it. I thought as you were talking, the 20% reduction is a classic. So BUSA challenged the 20% reduction, and I created a timeline of all the activities that have taken place, and skipping right to executive summary, get to the end. BUSA actually won. The court found for BUSA. What happened? The Department of Higher Education and Training didn't change. So despite the fact there is a court case there, so now it's with NEDLAC. Another organization that certainly when you see it on paper is very well intentioned. I have certain reservations about whether our money actually is well spent, whether it's efficient, economic, and effective use of our resources, because it's still at NEDLAC. The argument being that DHET says, look, yes, we've reduced it to 20%, but look, we've put all the money on discretionary grant funding. But the problem that employers have is that discretionary grant funding is not going where employers want it to go, because the requirements for a CETA are dictated by Department of Higher Education and Training. They put it in the Memorandum of Understanding and the annual report that the CETA is required to comply with. And so the CETA, that's what I mean by what are we measuring? So measuring whether a CETA is complying, they're simply complying with what Department of Higher Education and Training told them to do. That may not be what the employer wants, or in fact what our economy needs.
So then just a last comment from Morena. They can just implement that all companies pay SDL again. To Michael Tiger, what is your opinion on 8 credits being the minimum for a skills program in the QCTO, as opposed to allowing at least the minimum of 1 credit? Colleagues, we're on 10 o'clock, so we have to wrap. But Michael, I think that's exactly one of the issues that Sylvia's thinking or planning to raise in a fortnight's time. So please put that date in your diary. And colleagues, again, you'll see that Angelique has posted in the chat box the link to get CPD points. So please click there for your CPD points. Lastly, just to say to Sylvia, thanks again, Sylvia. A very interesting session again, and I'm looking forward to a fortnight to see what your thinking is.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Andy. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it enormously, and I did some reading, and I found something that uses the word "a" with regard to credits. So yes, I'm also looking forward to it. It's going to be very interesting.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
to
Bye-bye.
everybody. Thanks.